Greetings. So this is the lecture for Learning Module 2 in the Bible and Spiritual Formation. This week we're going to look at some works by some early Christian writers, as well as work with some scripture. Clement was a Christian apologist, missionary, theologian in the Greek world, and second known leader of the catechetical school at Alexandria. He synthesized Greek philosophy and Mosaic tradition and attempted to mediate Gnostics and Orthodox Christians in his day. Clement was probably an Athenian by birth, although well-versed in all branches of Greek literature and in all existing systems of philosophy. In these he found nothing of permanent satisfaction. In his adult years, he embraced the Christian religion and by extensive travels east and west, sought the most distinguished teachers he could find. So coming to Alexandria in the year 180, he became a pupil of Pantaeus, his teacher and first reported leader of the catechetical school. Captivated by his teacher, Clement became a presbyter in the church at Alexandria and an assistant to Pantaeus, and about 190, his successor as head of the catechetical school. So look at his writing to the newly baptized. And St. Anthony, known as the father of monks, was born in Egypt in 251 of pious parents who departed this life when he was very young. On hearing the words of the gospel, "If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell what thou hast and give to the poor," which is Matthew 19:21. He immediately put that into action, distributing to the poor all that he had, and he departed to the desert to become an ascetic. Henry Nouwen wrote a book about the practice of desert spirituality and what it has to offer us today that you might want to check out. I posted a link to an Eastern Orthodox book on the sayings of the Desert Fathers. Check out a few of these from Abba Anthony. And Augustine's Confessions is a Christian classic in which he recalls his conversion to Christianity in the vein of, in the genre of testimony or witness. It's a work of anamnesis, of remembering his life, and it is kind of a talking cure, a phrase that's often used in psychology for how one receives healing from telling one's story. I'm not suggesting that you read the whole thing for this course, but look at it or select one of the books to read. Last time I talked a little about spiritual formation and practices that lead to spiritual growth. I want to confess, speaking of confessions, that I am a bit of a spiritual dropout in some ways. I resist or have resisted the discipline or duty of spiritual practices, and I'm skeptical of spiritual fads. What's the next best thing that is somehow supposed to make me closer to God? Yet I remain open because I have those moments of renewal and rest in my restlessness. Christian practices are things we do not to prove how Christian we are, or to earn God's love, or to achieve a star in our crown. The early reformers in the Reformation call this works righteousness, or being saved by works, by things that we do. But Christian practices are something that we are led to do in response to God's love, out of our faith. They're not busy work. It's not Jesus is coming, so look busy. I've posted a chart on Brightspace that juxtaposes spiritual formation over against works righteousness for you to take a look at. A thing to know with spiritual practices and retreats is that we do them not for what we can get out of them, a mountaintop experience, or expect some great revelation. Often our practices may seem stilted or even dry, but we believe in grace, and though Through God's grace, God is made known to us. We sometimes slog through the day. We get busy, we forget. It's a wonderful story that Jerome Berriman tells in his book, Godly Play, about Martin Luther. Martin Luther was afflicted with what he called Anfechtung, a great German word, Anfechtung, which is a kind of despair or suffering or religious doubt that some say left him fairly desperate. He tried several remedies. First, he used the approach of self-help. He was a good monk. He kept the rule of order so strictly that he said, if ever a monk got into heaven by his monkery, it would be me. The trouble was that despite nearly killing himself with his vigils and his prayers and his reading, he got no sense of peace. So next he tried to rely on the merits of the saints. He went to Rome seeking answers and got none. He tried the way of confession in an Augustinian order. But there he had a wonderful spiritual guide who grew weary of Luther's constant confessing. So his guide was a mystic who recognized Luther's spiritual dryness for what it was. Instead of prayer and confessing, the guide informed Brother Martin that he would begin studying for his doctoral degree, that he would preach each week and began counseling others. Oh, and by the way, you'll teach a course at the university. Luther stammered that all that work is going to kill me, but his guide was insistent. And soon Luther was too busy to practice religion for the payoff. He began to enjoy his work, and he came close to God in preparing his lectures and sermons. His work became his play, and it was a deep play that brought him joy. So Christian practices are a means of grace, a term used by John Wesley to describe the means or the ways that people experience God. His term, sanctifying grace, is what allows us what we need to grow in faith in the love and knowledge of God. As I mentioned in the last lecture, this is referred to as sanctification or going on to perfection. Not perfect in the sense of not making mistakes, but perfect in the sense of wholeness and relationship with God, the way that God created us to be. There are traditions of cataphatic and apophatic spirituality. Apophatic is the via negativa way, contentless prayer, knowing God without words. It is listening, deep listening. Cataphatic is a way to God through images, words, activity. Knowing God through what Parker Palmer called the active life. Most likely you engage in both. Perhaps you have a leaning toward one or the other. Eugene Peterson said that busyness is the great enemy of spirituality. But I don't know about that. We can be attended to and attentive to God in our daily activity as ordinary people. You don't have to be a monk or even clergy. You don't have to go away somewhere, although that can be useful, and that's why I'm inviting you to do that for this course. It is important to have a rhythm of prayer, work, study, and play. All these things lift us up. Study is one of those cataphatic practices. So now I'm going to segue into some work that we're going to do this week with a passage from Leviticus. We're going to take a more cognitive approach to this at first, and I'd like for us to do some exegesis on this passage. Exegesis means to lead out, as opposed to eisegesis, which is to read in. Exegesis is to read out, to get at what the text is saying rather than reading into it what we think. Hermeneutics is the art and science of interpreting the Bible. The science involved in interpreting the Bible is based on rules such as context, who is speaking, who is being spoken to, what the message is being given to the group being spoken to. So exegesis is a systematic way of interpreting a text. The Bible started out as oral tradition, as you know. No original manuscripts exist, although we have some fairly ancient ones. Early church theologians had their ways of interpreting the text. And these endured for a long time. But the late 18th and 19th centuries brought new methods that were developed by emerging scholars by applying historical critical methods to the interpretation of the Bible, such as Schleiermacher and Wellhausen. Exegesis involves a critical approach, not critical in the sense of criticizing or devaluing the text, but critical in the sense of investigation, going deep and analyzing. So you have different kinds of criticism. You have textual criticism. That's the quest for the original wording. What was the earliest that we can find? And then there's historical criticism, the setting in time and place. Literary criticism, the composition and style, the authorship. Form criticism, which is what genre is this text? Is it poetry? Is it law? Is it apocalyptic? Is it prophecy? Is it folktale? Is it an epistle? And then there's redaction criticism, how it was edited and why. How did it get into its final form? And then there's canonical criticism. What books were selected for the canon and what was the thought process going into that and how was it used in the church? So our purpose is for deeper understanding and perhaps to prepare us to teach or preach on a particular passage. So I've posted a handout on Brightspace that provides a step-by-step guide that I've gleaned from two sources. One is Ringy and Tiffany's book entitled Biblical Interpretation, a Roadmap. And the other is Biblical Exegesis by John Hayes. You may have your own exegetical protocol, which you learned and use, and you may use that. But I encourage exegetes to read the passage in more than one translation and to know the difference between a translation of the Bible and a paraphrase. A paraphrase would be like the Good News Bible, or some years back the Living Bible, or Eugene Peterson's The Message. You can use those, but read it in a translation is one that's translated into the English from the original languages, and it's important to seek those original languages. The roadmap approach or premise is that our own context and what we bring to the text is an important part of the interpretation process. So consider your own horizon, your own biases, and where you are in your faith journey. So identify the setting or the context, what came before this and what comes after, what's going on here. Think about the literary genre of the passage and the historical context, of course. And what was the agenda of the writer, do you think? Use a study Bible and look up the cross-references. So look down and see what other scripture passages there are referred to and consult those. Though our passage this week is from the Hebrew Bible, I'm going to suggest that when we read from the Gospels that we use a gospel parallel to compare and contrast the ways that the four gospel writers tell a particular story. Also explore the meaning of words. Do a word study. Look up their origins. It's helpful to use tools, Bible study tools, such as Bible dictionaries. Look up any unfamiliar words or even words that you know. The Bible dictionary may help you think about that word in a different way or see it in the context. Another tool is the Bible Atlas. Look at maps and photographs. I can understand something better when I know where it took place for some reason. Read about the terrain, the geography, the cities, and the countries. Another invaluable tool is the concordance. There's some unabridged versions for each translation of the Bible. Concordance really is an index to Bible passages because most of us don't have a lot of the Bible memorized. If you know one or two words in a Bible verse, you can look them up in a concordance and usually find the verse or the passage. I love using concordances with children and youth. They use them as well. Bible commentaries are another resource, but I suggest that you consult them last and consult more than one. Commentaries are written by specific people to give their interpretation of Scripture, and some are better than others, so be careful about that. And there are critical commentaries that explore the translations of the original languages and use textual and form criticism, and there are commentaries for teaching and preaching, like Feasting on the Word, for example. The New Interpreter's Bible Commentary, and make sure it's the new one, is also good. For teachers, I like A Storyteller's Companion to the Bible, or the Women's Bible Commentary. So your assignment this week is to do an exegesis on Leviticus 23, verses 23 to 44, and to post a summary on the discussion board. What was something really interesting that you learned from this passage? How might you engage it in preaching or teaching? I look forward to see what you come up with. So go now in peace.